what are the biggest challenges that you have encountered in balancing these long-term vision, but also long-term incentive with the short-term incentives that are so necessary to uh, bring the project forward and to make it successful on the ground so that communities and other groups adopt it?
Okay. So the conflicts between short-term and long-term stuff.
Challenges in balancing
Okay.
the short-term and long-term
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. The whole what you describe is sort of the whole game of a bit of restoration and working with these rural communities, because we can have these nice dreams of, you know, reforestation and a bigger vision of saving the planet and the climate, but to be honest, I mean, they care, but these rural communities, they don't really care. I mean, that's the fundamental truth. They care about next year's harvest. They care if their animals can feed themselves and if they'll have an income at the end of the day. And so I think the whole game is to make sure that you actually accommodate those things and at the same time try to guide them and get them on a long-term path. And that's the whole challenge of the project. So.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. I was just going to say there's a couple of examples that I found stunning from, I was recently in the field being explained about the project. There were two things that completely struck me in Senegal particularly. Number one, it was absolutely about the livestock. Nobody, I mean, yes, the trees bring rain, I was told, but unless the livestock have grass, what point is there? And in the degraded ecosystems here, there used to be 15 species of grass. There are now only 5, sometimes less, as many as 2. And it's the quality of the grass that actually restoring land can provide instant benefits. So that's one of the, as foresters, that's one of the things that we've got to completely change our view on how you think about value in the short term. And the other thing that, you know, don't forget about the long term, because of course, I mean, the people downstairs who I don't think are in this room are thinking about returns and what's happening in the future with carbon. But there is also the return on the cash crops. So one of the tree crops, one of the things we're trying to do is learn new techniques to make the fruiting happen faster. But even then, you know, you talk about fruiting happening in 5 years instead of 10 years, it's still 5 years too late. So absolutely the short-term incentives have got to win out.
Yeah, just really want to echo what Gilles and Jessica have said. Really, it's really a privilege to kind of think long term. And I've just noticed that the communities, they can't afford to, right? Like I mentioned in the presentation, it's really a challenge because they have all these kind of life things that they have to immediately deal with, and you know, it's like if a tree's going to fruit in 5 years, again, it's 5 years too late. So what we've had to do is, you know, we're using sort of agricultural residues to like make oyster mushrooms so that they can get like more immediate income, or doing, you know, assisting them with, say, cassava processing. So again, just to kind of bring some added value early on while the trees are developing. So yeah, it's a really difficult balance.
It's really interesting that it seems like we all make the same experiences on the ground. And just an example, in the mango season in Sierra Leone, up to 80% of the mangoes simply rot because of after harvest losses. So it's for me, it was the most important thing to understand where the short term like hardships come from. And we were talking about solar dryers for the mangoes, and I talked to the farmers. Okay, what if you could dry the mangoes, which would create jobs in the villages, and then sell them instead of May, which is the high season for mango, is to sell them dried in September. So they all begin to smile because they know, okay, you'll get a good price for that. And also what I've been talking about, the seeds, it's they are facing hardships also from the system down there. At the beginning of the groundnut season, they they don't have money and they don't have products. So they go to the local seed traders and say, okay, give me a credit. And then they might lose the best moment for planting, and then they have to give back for 10 bags of groundnuts, they have to give back 20. So after 5 months, 100% of interest. So we gave to the community seeds, not as a donor, but with a small amount of interest. So next year they will have their own seeds. And these small incentives, like on short term, and you can really generate commitment for the whole project with relatively small investments, but a great help.
So I wanna add something else as well. It's also structural as well. So it's like it's less kind of about like tree planting and all of these things. So we kind of need to get these like structural road blockages out of the way of farmers so they can thrive. And I think we will demonstrate like the farmers know what to do, but there's these like blockages that we need to get out the way, kind of like land tenure, or if it's like infrastructure, like storage. For example, maize. We're in a maize growing region, so like you, there's so much post-harvest losses because they're just drying the maize on the side of the road, right? And then if it rains, like the harvest is destroyed. So there's like structural things we need to change to achieve that balance.
Maybe now we have some questions. I think maybe everyone can hear you. Or give it a try. Or yeah. Okay. Yeah, just in case.
Hi, I'm Wade from Global Forest Generation, and one thing I think that's not really being discussed all that much, even though it's really important, is actually like survival rates. And we've seen these like massive projects like in Turkey, 1,000,000 trees planted in a day, and then you go back a few years later and none of them lived. And I just wanted to know, like, is this something you guys are finding that is becoming increasingly important when it's reporting for like your investors and your donors, and how are you addressing this when you decide to identify a restoration site? Is it a key factor to say that, okay, we think this is a good area that is going to have long-term success with the survival of what we're planting?
Yeah, I think it's key. I mean, that's the stuff that I lie awake about at night. I mean, all this other stuff is also important, but yeah, I mean, the tree surviving is key. Otherwise, the project doesn't make any sense, right? So, yeah, we see that. I think a couple of years ago, it was present then, but we see that the donors are asking more and more to keep reporting, even in the long term, like not 3 years, but longer term. And for example, we're developing a carbon project now, and there it's very simple. If your tree doesn't grow, then there's no carbon credits. So so yeah, I think it's key. And for us, we try to learn as much as possible because we've been active for 5 years, and we know now which soil characteristics, which community characteristics, site topographies work to do a successful planting project. And yeah, we still see in the Sahel you need to take into account certain mortality rates, but yeah, we see that it's the survival rates are also what keeps the project alive. So yeah.
Just a great question, and something to add from our side. I think it's one of those things that makes me smile, because oftentimes if people ask what's your survival rate, they also want to give you 15 cents a tree, and you're like, I'm sorry, if you're going to do which one do you want? You don't do cheap tree planting. It's a 15-year minimum commitment, and you need to be paying at least 2 years capital investment in advance so that you can build the nursery so the seeds can stay and germinate for longer, so they're stronger. You have to do all of that, like millions of pit digging. It's a properly investing your time to do it. And so I think that's the other thing that, I'd be happy when we all, I think, stand together and say, cheap tree planting doesn't mean good survival rates. End of story.
Yeah, and I think for us, the climatic zone we're in, I think we've got like an abundance of water. The soil is relatively fertile. It's dropping dramatically, but for us, it's not really about the survival rate. It's more about we're doing to empower the community for the kind of whole farming system to survive. Yeah, so I kind of like switch off if I'm asked about like survival rates, because then it leads to, so yeah, 15 cents a tree, and it's just not workable, right? So yeah, we kind of need to change that kind of thinking and narrative about survival rates, and also the science is there also, right? Because if you kind of, again, like getting out the way and kind of letting nature do what it does best, it rebounds so fast. You can even have much better survival rates if you kind of just focus on the kind of whole system rather than kind of like these individual trees. But yeah, I get it. They're about numbers, so it's difficult.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we're in different regions. So Kofi and I, we're in regions where there's abundance of water. So in the rainy season, so survival rates are not that difficult. I want to add that the trees should have sort of benefit to the communities, and we visited like 20 years old agroforest trees, or maybe 5 years old, who begin to bear fruits. And so people are interested if they get a benefit from it. And what we see, that if you plant trees that people are familiar with, maybe not all of them, but the system, for example, mangoes, cashew nuts, moringa is very common in the region. So this will help to engage the communities. And second thing is, of course, we need people on the ground to help to develop the nurseries, to have the really the best seeds, to get strong seedlings. And if this works together with the community, so I completely agree with you. So it's all about engaging the communities and giving them the benefits, short term and long term.
Thank you. Do we have a few more minutes? So if there are any more questions from the floor?
Hi there. I'm Yi from Terraformation. I'm curious because we've heard so much about community engagement, short-term benefits, right? Like economic models. Like this is tantamount to just like economic development, right? Developing new business models in a region. And I'm curious how much of that, like when you talk to your donors or grantors or your financial supporters, how much does that language come through? And how much of appeal does that have as a hook, right, for financial support, to talk about economic development, international development, as opposed to carbon per se?
Yeah, I think it depends really on. It depends from, let's say, call it financer to donor to. We've been lucky with, I think, that Ecosia is also a forward-thinking partner, because we're not an NGO, we're a company, so we're for profit, Hommes. And that's also one of the selling points towards these communities, that we're for profit. So and it's going to be a win-win partnership. But it's true in some other, let's call it EU-based applications. Or I don't know. You shouldn't talk too much about that. But I mean, that's just my experience. I don't know if you.
Yeah, it's similar, and I would say it depends. I think the one thing that I've seen happening more and more is that when you really need to talk about landscape restoration at scale, forest and landscape restoration, actually you move into a world that needs all of the donors with all their different drivers. So you need early stage risk investment, and that's often from philanthropists who really care, and it can be organizations who care about child and maternal health, nutrition, all of the things that they want to catalyze. And then you can bring in the next layer of funding, which might be corporate sponsorship because they care about trees. And then you bring in your people who really don't want to take the risk, carbon financiers perhaps, once you've moved to. So I think we're moving into a world of what is commonly called blended finance, but I think in order to do that, you need to get everything to work at the same time. You get everyone on board, and that's a super, super challenging. But I think that's really I think that's probably the best way. It's like the ultimate model is get everyone to finance bits of it that they care about. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, really good question. Got me thinking. Yeah, that's it's a challenge that we've had. It's like, yeah, they're just not into our initial main funder. Yeah, just didn't get, and so we were thinking, it's like, how, but that's, it's really two different ways of thinking. So it was really challenging to kind of balance that in terms of the stage we're at. And yeah, it really is about kind of understanding what type of finance you're going for and sort of being mindful of avoiding certain types where, and in terms of the stage where you're at. Yeah, nice. Yeah, really good. Got me thinking.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so my experience is that our first investors, they did not really care about the numbers. So they just of we invited them for investment, not for donations. And most of the time we were talking about how are you sure that you will really generate impact? How you are really sure how to that the local communities benefit from it? And so, of course, the economics of the business should be in place. We should do our homework for that. But in communication, at this early stage where we are, my experience is that impact communication is far more important than like have all the digits in place for the return on investment.